So hi everyone, welcome back to the Pytest automation framework series. In the previous videos, we have built our login functionality, created some reusable page object like login, login, then screenshots, weights, and framework utilities. Now, in today's episode, we are going to take to the next step and learn data-driven testing using the CSV file. So the idea is simple. Until now, our login test data is being driven by login data.py. Now, and here we have hard coded our data like username as admin and password admin123. And this works fine for single scenario. Uh, so if I run Pytest, so we can see our data was working fine so far for single username and password. But let's imagine a real application where we have to test like hundreds of username and password. So we definitely don't have to change the username and password for each test because that won't be possible practically. Now, so instead of that, what we can do is that we will store our test data outside the code now and read it dynamically. So there are two approach for that. One is either we can create a login underscore data dot csv inside the test data dot folder, or we can create a csv and copy paste here and read the data from that. For now we are just we will follow an approach where we can create a login underscore data dot csv in this folder and then read the data from that, because that's also equivalent. Now let's first create the file and then understand that what that file will do. No. So let me create a csv file first, and the file name would be, since it is a csv file, so we are going to use the extension .csv. Let's keep the file name same. No. Login underscore data .csv. So this is the file from which we will read the data for today's automation framework. Now, as we all know that a CSV stands for comma separated values. So whatever our fields are, we are going to enter the data and just separate them by comma. Okay. So right now we have two fields, username and password. So we will just write this field simply separated by comma, username, comma, password. And whatever our data are that we want to test for login, we can just simply write them as plain English. um, Admin. Suppose we want to test some invalid scenario, so in that case we can give some random username 123, password 123, username one two. Now let's think of it like as an Excel sheet saved as a plain text file. So our first row contains the username and password, and after every after that row, every row represent one scenario, like testing the username with testing the login with username admin and password admin 123, then testing the login with username 123 password 123, and then similarly username testing the login with username 12 and password 12. Yeah. So this one is for valid scenario. Okay, this one is for valid scenario, and the below two are for invalid scenario. So obviously the expected behavior should be, it should fail in the below two data. And one of the biggest advantage of data, we call it data driven testing, because our framework is now driving data. Okay. Now one of the biggest advantage, as I was just telling, that using the CSV is that we can keep our test data in a separate files, and we can use as many data as many we want. Now, so even if tomorrow suppose we have to add some more data, we can just simply go to this CSV file, and we don't need to modify our whole automation code. We just have to keep on adding the data here. Now, now once the CSV file is created, then we have to write the fixer to read the data. Now, so we are already familiar with the fixer. We all know what fixer do. So basically, fixer set up the data that is needed for test, like opening the browser, closing the browser, or setting up the database and closing it. Those kinds of activity. So here, when we are going to use the CSV file, a fixer will help us in preparing the data before the test start. And instead of writing the CSV logic inside every test case, like here, we can we will just simply write the logic in conftest.py for once, and it will work for login data. Okay. In future, if we are going to use any other CSV, then we will create another fixer, and we will use the fixer name in that test file. And using the fixer for reading the CSV help us in keeping the framework cleaner and avoids duplicate data. Okay. So let's write the fixer that is needed for that. Uh, so here we have already imported Pytest. So let import file import CSV, and then we will start writing our fixer code. We imported CSV now, right? As usual, we will just write first decorator pytest.fixer, no, so that pytest identify it as a fixer, and then we will define our method. Method will be like login data. Let's keep the name generic. uh, and now once we define our method, then we will create a empty list. This, now why empty list? Because this list will contain all the rows from the csv file. So these three rows will be stored in data as a list. Uh, now once we define an empty list, then we have to open the csv file to read the data from that. So for reading the data, we use with this syntax with open. Uh, these are common syntax that are used in Python also for opening the file. Now we are going to test data folder, then we are going to our csv file path, which is login data.csv, no, as file. So we are opening the csv file, and we can notice the use of with statement. So one common question that arises, that why not simply write the open function? Because with, when we are using the with keyword, it automatically close the file once we are done with that. No. And because of that, using the with makes it a standard practice, or we can say best practice. Now once we open the file, the next step is to read the data. So far we are just written some simple code. We defined the fixer, we created a method inside that fixer, we created empty list. Now we are opening the file. Once the file is open, the next step is to read the data from the file. And for that we are going to use a variable reader is equal to csv dot, and this is one of my favorite classes in the csv module. So instead of reading like rows like as a list admin from admin 1 to 3, this dit reader, it converted into dictionary. So when it encounter admin 1, sorry, admin and admin 1 to 3, it converted to into something like our key name was username, which will become admin, and our another key name was password. So our password becomes 1 2 3. Okay. So that's the benefit of using the csv dos this. So instead of reading it like as a list, it converted into dictionary. Now once uh, now the benefit is that I don't have to remember that username is stored at index 0 and password is stored at as index 1, because if we are not using this module, then as I told you, it our username and password will be treated like this, and in that case we have to remember the index that admin is at our 0 index, while uh, password is at index 1. So that thing is now removed, and we don't have to remember the indexing of our data. And instead, now we can directly use the row with username, like let me create. So once we read the data in dictionary format, the next is to run the loop for each of the dictionary data. So here we are going to create a variable name for row in reader. So if there are three rows, then it will run three times. What we are going to do, we are just trying to iterate our framework for each row present in our CSV. So this already converted to dictionary. Now we are iterating for each of that dictionary data. Huh. So every time this this loop iterate, this row contain single row of data. So like if first time when the loop runs, when first time the loop runs, then at that time our user name is admin and password is password 123. Sorry. Now when second iteration is running, then our username become username 123, then password becomes password 123. So that's how the iteration is working, and because of the same we are using the for loop. Now once we are inside the loop, now let's print the data. Now we can print the data for our own, we can say, uh, so that we can see if the row if the data from CSV is reading properly or not through strip. So we can either print the data or we can strip. In case we want to verify if the data from the CSV file is been read properly or not, we can use that. Okay. So that's one way to verify. But now let's strip it. We will directly see how it is working. So now let's data dot append, and then we are now what this line is doing, data dot append, and we are sending row as a parameter. So with this line we are adding every dictionary to our list, and after the loop is finished, our data would look like something like that, it will become dictionary inside the loop. So if we have like three sets of data so far in our CSV, so it will just so username, whatever the username we have given, that will comes here. uh, and then password. Similarly, like for the first dictionary, it will be admin 123. Then for the second, it will be username 123. Then password. For the third dictionary, it will become username 12 and password 12. Uh, And once we are done with that, once all the dictionary is appended into the row, then we can return the data. Uh, So we are defining a fixer, then we are defining a method, we are creating empty list data, then we are opening the CSV file, we are reading each data as a dictionary, and then we are appending that dictionary in our empty list. So once all the dictionary is added into the list, then we are returning that data. Now our test has access to the row inside the CSV. Okay. But even that is not enough. We need to modify our login page also, because earlier we were reading the data from login underscore data.py, and hence our code was something like that. We were importing URL, username, password, and then simply we were using them. Now, since we are planning to fetch the username and password from this CSV file, so first thing we need to do is that we need to comment it out, so that our framework does not read from this file. Now, now the next step will be to modify our login file.py. Now, or just a minute, we can. Okay. So let's first change our test file. Now, then we will move to login page. So basically, we have to modify all the files. Like we have to first define the fixer, then we have to modify test underscore login.py, and then we have to also modify the page file. So here, so as usual, the first thing we have to do is that we have to first import the data. uh, and for importing, we are just going to uh, just a minute. Now we have two login data, data files, and we have to import URL from one file, and uh, username and password from another file. So what we will do is that we will import first, and here we are capturing. Now once we define here driver from a login data, so what we are trying to do, we are just trying to define two features. The first one is the driver, okay, for browser, and the second one is for the login data that we are that we recently define here. No. So the second one that we use login underscore data, so it gives me the list returned by our fixer, no, which is basically collection of all the dictionary, and these fixtures are automatically injected in our test whenever we need them. The next thing we have to write is the we have to iterate for each login data. Okay. So let's try. So earlier we had just simple browser, so sorry, simple one row of data, so we were just calling it using directly. But now we have three sets of data, so we have to iterate it using a for loop. So we are going to use for row in login data, uh, for every row of data that is being fetched from the fixer. Now since fixer login data is a list, so we can easily iterate over it. Now and I'm iterating for each row of data that is present in this list, and that is basically a dictionary. No. Now comes the interesting part. Earlier we were just using simple username, password, and we were just calling that using this line. Now we have three sets of data, and we have to iterate for each of them. No. So instead of hard coding like admin and admin123, we are going to fetch the username for each of the data that is been returned from the fixer, and we will use it. So for the first set of for the first iteration, admin will go to username and admin123 will go to password, and then for the second iteration, simple username 123 password, and so those things are handled by Pytest. We don't have to take tension for that. No. So when for the first iteration is done, then we receive admin and admin123. Similarly, for second iteration, we receive user123 whatever data we have stored on, and this iteration keeps on. What exactly remains same is the test. No, only the data keeps on changing, and that's exactly what data driven testing is all about. Um, So once that is done, let's move back to our login page file, and let's see. We have to do some changes here as well. Now, So loaded um, so here we have to first define our data, that how we are going to change the way we are reading the data. So first thing we have to do is that let's define static method and driver. Now earlier we were simply using the method. Now we are using static method. So now the question arises, why are we using a static method? And that is actually very important decision. Now, normally to call a method inside a class, we first create an object. For example, login is equal to login page. Now, so to call a method inside a class, what we do? Just a minute. Oh. We first create an object of that class. Now, and then we use that object to call a method inside the class. Now, now let's look at our login page class carefully. If we look, we can notice that we are not storing any information. It does not even have init method. No. And it does not have any instance variable like self dot username or self dot driver. So nothing exists. This login page is just performing an action. Since this method does not depend on any object specific data, so creating an object every time would be unnecessary. So when we are writing static method belongs to the class itself rather than the individual objects, and that's why we can simply call it using as login. We can simply call it using the command login page dot login driver username password. So we can simply crawl using this using this syntax without first creating the login object, and this would tips our code shorter, cleaner, and easier to read. Yeah. For utility style methods like login, logout, or navigation, a static method is perfectly reasonable choice because they don't rely on object state. No. Now we are opening the application login page, and these are the like existing code. No. We already have changed time dot slip to explicit wait. No. Now notice something, we are sending here, we are sending username and password to username field and password field. So this value won't be hard coded anymore. this will be derived from the CSV. And the same happens for the password also. So every iteration value changes. No. So on first iteration, admin will go to username, admin123 will go to password, and so on. So let's run data, uh, and see if it is working properly or not. Okay. Hmm. It is showing some error. Cannot import username from. Oh, sorry. So here we can notice something, that our framework does not run for this data. It just simply run for admin123, and it seems like the login session is being maintained. Now, since we are not still using the parameterized fixer, because of that it is not using each data separately for each session. Now, what we can do is that after every login, we can just clean the cookies, and then we can try the next login attempt. Because if I don't clear the cookies, the next iteration may all before the next iteration, the user may already be logged in, and we can affect the login attempt. So let's just delete all the cookies. Driver dot there is something like delete. mm, oh, sorry. So with this line, I am deleting all the cookies before the next login attempt. Uh, So let's try again and see if it is working or not. So our browser remains open, and in the entire session we try all the three username and password was been attempted. And even though the first time the login was successful, the next two time the login was unsuccessful, and that's why it is throwing an error, because it is simply trying all the login data in the single session. Now, so that was all about reading the data from the CSV file. Tomorrow we will try parameterized fixture. In the parameterized fixture, we will try to fetch the data from fixture, so that for every iteration, or we can say for every row of data, separate session is handled, and we can check for every row of data separately that whether the test case is passed or failed. For today, since all the data is been tested in the single session, so that's why even though in the first row the login was successful, but in the next two row the login was unsuccessful and our test failed. Uh, in today's video we introduce one of the most commonly used concept in automation testing, that is like data driven. So instead of changing our automation code every time, we just have to change the credentials, um, and we have to simply update our CSV file. Our fixer will read the data, and the test loops through each record um, for new credentials, and the page object perform the logging using the values passed to it. Um, in the next video, we will improve this further by using the Pytest parameterization, where each row of test data becomes an independent test execution, which I already told you. And then we can easily visualize that for the first set of data, our test case will be passed. For the next two set of data, our test case will be failed. And that will give us a better reporting, isolated test runs, and fresh browser lifecycle for each data set. So that's a pattern we see in many real world PyTest framework. So that's it for today. Thank you. See you tomorrow in the next video. Thank you.